Welcome. So good to be with you all. Thank you to our esteemed host, Glenn Grossman. Chock full of information again tonight. Looking forward to digging into the details. As many know, Glenn Grossman is an epidemiologist with over 20 years of experience. While pursuing his doctorate in epidemiology at UNC Chapel Hill, Glenn served as an epidemiologist on staff at the UNC Infectious Disease Clinic for 2 years, and he taught epidemiology and advanced analytics at Duke Medical School and at UNC. He has been involved in epidemiology forecasting and advanced analytics with Bristol Myers Squibb, Sanofi, Novartis, Medicare, Medicaid, Veterans Health Administration, Military Health Service, the CDC, and other programs within the United States and abroad. All views expressed today are his own. Okay, so we are going to kick it off with our usual beginning. Glenn, please update us. How are things looking in the United States and abroad?
Thanks, Rebecca. Welcome back. So let me share my screen. Yeah, so we've been in this pivotal moment where we know that there's a strong component of a seasonality to SARS-CoV-2 spread because it's a respiratory illness. It's been tracing globally very closely with pneumonia, and so very similar to the typical colds and flu season, where in the Northern Hemisphere, you get it beginning around September, October, and ending around February, March-ish, roughly that order of magnitude. And summers are typically late for cold and flus. And so we've been seeing that in a lot of countries. However, the Delta variant has changed the rules. And so the Delta variant is so contagious, we're seeing this surge now. Let me make this a little bit bigger. All right. And so what does this mean? And so the surge that we're looking at now, when you look at it at a high level, this is just cases, it seems to have peaked and have started to go, and it seems to be going down already. But this is very misleading. And so if you see anything in the news that's saying, oh, look, we've already peaked, very misleading. The reason is, when you look at this, this is a little bit, let me show you the more 4 weeks. All right, so, well, that makes it harder to see. All right, so the big story here is that only like 3 or 4 states are making up the vast majority of cases now. So even though you can see a growth in virtually every single state except those 1 or 2, it makes it seem like the surge is going down. When in reality, a better way to look at it is sort of when you break it up regionally. And so the New York Times does this. I like the way that they do it. So when you break it up regionally, you can see that the blue is starting to come down, or it looks like it's coming down a little bit south. Again, that's primarily driven by Florida seeming to drop, even though it's a little bit unclear what this data is saying. It could be legitimate. Florida seems like it's dropping. That makes up a large proportion of the cases. California has also been dropping for other reasons than Florida. And so when you look at it, Florida is the South, but when you look at it, when we're looking here, it makes it look like the South is really dropping and then the West is dropping some, when really it's just those 2 states that are driving a lot of what we're perceiving as dropping. However, when you look at the other states, it's still rising. Similarly, for Midwest and for the Northeast, we see this continuing rise. Now, the worrisome thing is when you compare where we are now with this surge to where we were at the end of last summer. So we're looking here, let's compare September 10th. So September 10th, we were pretty low. That was sort of around the lowest point between the 2 surges. Whereas now, September 10th, we're seeing really high numbers going into the fall. And so the worry now is that we will get trapped in this cold and flu season with higher numbers than we want to be. And the surges could easily get higher than what we had last winter. The thing about Delta is that because it's so contagious, that means that it's going to spread a lot faster. And that's why the surge is going so what we can see. By that, what I mean is that the shape of the curve should continue to go up if it continues. And I'll talk about this in a second. But it also means that the peak should be reached earlier. So whereas we reached the peak December, January timeframe last year, this year the peak could be hit much earlier. And so we could be talking about October timeframe where we're hitting the peak here. The key question now is whether the surge and the behavior we're seeing right now is primarily driven by the Delta variant, and the vaccines will prevent the spread. So that means that states that are heavily vaccinated will peak now or have already peaked. Or, so that's the first scenario, that it's really the vaccine story that's driving what the next 3 to 6 months will look like. Or alternatively, the question is, will kids going back to school drive the spread? That they're going to go back to school could be very contagious, and then they'll start to spread it more. Or it could be a mixture of both. But the two main scenarios we're dealing with are one where we have the vaccines, and then it's peaking around where we're seeing now, and that's sort of explaining what we're seeing, and that this is legitimate and it's just going to continue to go down, or alternatively that it's going to start to spike again, similar to Tennessee, what you see here, which seemed to go down, but really this was a data point that's an error. But here, a better way to look at this is here. So here's the U.S. If we specifically look at Tennessee, so with kids going back, the problem was this red is a 7-day moving average, and it looks like there was some missing data around September 2nd or so, so around the holiday and whatnot. So we can't really interpret this, but when you look at the specific spikes, so for instance, these days that were among the highest seen so far in the whole epidemic in Tennessee were September 6th, September 7th. So it does appear to still be increasing. And so this is the big question that we're going to be talking about today. What does it look like with kids spreading it? We've talked previously that for the typical flu season, there's a variety of factors that drive flu season every year. But one of the most intriguing, let me see if I can pull this up real quickly. One of the most intriguing is this idea that, give me 1 second, is the idea that the kids in school are really primarily responsible for the spread. And so I think I have a slide here that describes this well. Yes, here it is. So this was from a study that was published. It was published back in 2003, and it was looking at the rates of flu each year from 1996 through 1998. And one thing that they noticed, because for a while it's been unclear what's driving the flu, how come it has the seasonal component? We do see seasonal variation where in the wintertime is the typical cold flu season. And it's not exactly clear why. Some people think it's maybe because of temperature or humidity or different things that we eat or different behaviors that we have during different times of the year, different activities we engage in. But there's lots of moving parts. It's unclear. This graph, though, is really a strong graph, I think. And what we're showing here is the green dots are when kids get infected. The red dots are the red lines are when adults get infected with flu. And so from this graph, it was concluded that the green, like the kids, are getting infected first, and then they're spreading it. And then the other older people are then getting it from the kids after the kids pass it around. And so the question now that the kids are all back in school largely around the country is, will COVID-19 look like flu? Where basically the kids go back in school, and even if they're masked up, remember, a typical flu season might only have an R naught of like 1.5 or 2. So on average, one kid might infect 1 or 2 other kids. But when we're looking here with COVID-19 Delta, one kid could easily infect 8 or more other kids. And we suspect that based on seasonality that we've seen before, that that there's going to be a bump in how contagious SARS-CoV-2 is, and it might actually increase in how contagious it is by 30% versus what it was over the summer. So on average, 2 months ago, someone with Delta infected 8 other people. Now we could get even more and maybe hit up to 10 or more people. And so this is a really, really much more contagious virus than the flu, much more severe than the flu as well among people who do get infected. And so what will this look like for kids in school? So this is going to be something we additionally discuss. Masks are still helpful, but masks are not going to be as helpful now as they were a year ago for kids who are in class for 8 hours for the day, who are touching their face. And we've talked previously about some good masking options, but definitely the kids have to have much better masks than they had before. You can't get away with just the cotton woven masks. It has to really be a much better mask. A lot of people are now double masking. The first mask is more of like a filter, and then the second mask really makes it tight against the face. But it's going to be, I don't know that we can really trust all the kids of our nation to be the ones to prevent this surge from happening in the fall. And so I think a lot of us are thinking that what Tennessee looks like is what much of the rest of the country looks like. And in fact, I can look at Tennessee. We'll jump into it in a little while. But just when we're looking at Tennessee, I like to break this down by age. And so you can see that in all of the previous surges, the kids, which were the gold, so the dotted gold, this one down here were 0 to 4. The dashed is 5 to 11 years old, and the solid line was 12 to 15. You can see in all of the previous surges, the kids got it the least. But now with the kids returning to school, now the kids have broken out. And now the kids are going, this gray area, we can't really pay much attention to because the data isn't in. So it's actually not the case that it's going down. Whoops, I overshot it. So it's going up. You see the kids are rising very rapidly. Oh, I'll just keep it there. And so we don't know how high it's going to go, but the kids could drive another surge. You see, it's very clear. Let me bring it down once just to make it a little bit clearer. My point here is that with the adults, there was clear evidence that it was starting to go down for many age groups. And now in states where it's the kids are driving it back up again, the other adults seem to be driving back up again too. So it's completely reasonable to assume that the kids are going to go back to school and really start driving another massive surge, and then they're going to go back and infect everyone around. And so that means the next couple of months are critical. One of the first states to open schools, they opened schools at the beginning of August rather than a lot of the other states in the country that opened more recently, is Tennessee. We've looked at them recently. Let's see where they are now. So here's Tennessee. This is all of their previous surges. The kids went back to school early August, and then the kids broke out, and the kids went wild and just attending school, and you can see that this is the kids' cases. Now remember, having said that, just because the kids get sick, it's not as worrisome as adults generally. So we can talk about this in a second. Whoops, let me come back here. But basically, there's a couple key graphs here. I'm not going to go into it right now if I can't find it too quickly. But basically, the risk for kids of severe disease is extremely low. So here's an example. There's two key things on this graph. One is the red dots. The red dot is the risk of dying from COVID. The blue dot is the risk after vaccination. So the red dot line is the key thing that we want to look at. When you compare 90-year-olds to 80-year-olds, 80-year-olds have much less. This is a logarithmic scale. So it's dropping by an order of magnitude each time you drop from one line to the next. So when you compare an 80-year-old to a 60-year-old, it's dropped by, so 60-year-olds have around 10% the risk that an 80-year-old does. Similarly, when you go from 60 to 40, a 40-year-old has 10% the risk that a 60-year-old does, or 1% the risk of what a 90-year-old does. When you drop from 40 to, let's call it 25 or so, if you extend the red line out, then that would mean that they have 10% of the risk of a 40-year-old. So a 25-year-old has 10% the risk of a 40-year-old. If you continue extending the line down, you can see that a 15-year-old or someone who's under 18 has a really low risk of mortality, but also this represents the risk of hospitalization and that kind of stuff that we'll get to in a second. Right now, order of magnitude, the best estimates that I've seen are that if a kid gets infected, so under the age of 18, on average, they will have around a 0.8% chance of needing to be hospitalized. So under 1% chance, but almost 1% chance of needing to be hospitalized. Among kids who are hospitalized, it's the estimates range from like 25 to 30% of them will need to go to the intensive care unit, and then only a tiny percentage of them will ultimately die. So most of them will recover. The big issue that we talked about last week and that we are going to have to continue to talk about are that we estimate there's only around 4,500 pediatric intensive care unit beds in the United States for everything, for car accidents, for cancer patients, for any emergency that requires intensive care. There's only around 4,500 beds. If you just do the math out, so right now we estimate there's around 35 million kids in the United States who are susceptible. So they've either not been vaccinated, because as you know, some kids 12 and over can be vaccinated, and they haven't previously been infected. We assume that there's around 35 million of the susceptible kids under 18. If you multiply the 35 million times the 0.8%, so that's the risk of hospitalization, times the 25 to 30% or so, then even if half of those kids get infected, we're going to exceed the number of, forget about just exceeding 4,500. If we assume that there's already kids in there, when you multiply it out, you can easily get to 6,000, 7,000 kids where only half of the people of these kids are infected. And so if more than half of the kids get infected over the next few months, then we might exceed that even more. But these 6,000 kids we're talking about are in addition to car accidents and any other kids requiring intensive care. And so we could very quickly blow past the number of beds we have for intensive care for kids in this country. And that is the key concern epidemiologists are worried about. We're worried about hospitals in general, and that is a critical issue that we're looking at. But in addition, as a separate issue, are these pediatric intensive care unit beds. The reason is in schools, because the risk of hospitalization is so low, a lot of school boards might not have feedback to close down the school, because if they see kids getting sick, they might just continue keeping the schools open because they figure, oh, the kids are not at high risk of severe disease, so the kids will just be out of school for a few days or out of school for a week or two, but then they'll come back and they'll be just fine. And if they believe that, then if only one kid in each of these schools needs to be hospitalized, we're going to just blow past the number of hospital beds we have for kids. And kids can't use regular adult hospital beds because the masks don't fit right. Everything is set up for kids in the kid hospitals. And so the kid hospital beds. And so you need different training. Pediatricians know specific doses to give, which are very different than adults. And so once you're out of the beds and the support staff and the physicians, medical staff associated with that, we're potentially in some really bad shape. All right, let me go back to here. So the question is, will the rest of the country look like this? We're already starting to see it, because this was just Tennessee. Previously, we didn't see the signal for the United States at large, but now indeed we are seeing it breaking out in the United States at large. This was the last data point here was, it's hard to see now because the data is not good during this break period. Not a lot of states are reporting as much as they should, so it's a little bit hard to see. But the last good data was only August 28th. So it's hard to know exactly what it looks like now, but we already see the signal happening. So that means that the peak is very likely to hit middle to late October. Peak in cases will hit before peak in hospitalizations, because as we know, it takes days or a week or two after people get infected before they end up requiring hospitalizations. And the hospitalizations accumulate because people stay in the hospital for multiple days. All right.
Glenn, can I just pause for one moment? We have a question from the audience about the hotspots. Rachel, if you could unmute and ask your question, please.
Glenn, for these hotspot states, Tennessee, Texas, California, it looked like Florida, is it due to low vaccinations, lack of mask mandating, all of the above? Why are, and if so, or like if somebody has to travel to one of these states, what is the best way to protect themselves if you have to go to one of these states? And why are they such hotspots?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The story that most epidemiologists are telling, and it's a good story, is that it's primarily a vaccination story, not masking. So it's the lack of dealing with this sufficiently. So it's both the lack of vaccination, lack of mask wearing, and whatnot. And those are really important factors. I think that those are really important. However, one thing that I like to point out is this. So when you compare this surge to last year's surge, oh no, this is not a good one. Let me come up. This is a better one. When you compare this year's surge to last year's surge, the same states that were the bad actors here, the blue, I don't know if you can see this well, the blue and the peach, this was the South and the West. These were the ones that were peaking most during this surge, were also the ones last summer that were peaking. So I think there's this other part of the story there, and that is that in the summertime, particularly in the South, because it gets so hot and humid in these places, a lot of people in the South just went inside for the air conditioner where it was cooler. And as a result, they just made it easier to infect each other. In the Northeast and much of the rest of the country, we spend summers outdoors as much as we can. And then in the winters, when it's cold, we come in and huddle inside. And so there's the seasonal component that I really think is a big part of the story of what was going on in the South. So I know in the news, a lot of people were saying, oh, it's the vaccines that are really driving it, or the Delta variant is more contagious. And all of those things are right. But I think we can't ignore that the surge that happened last year, which had the same regional variation that we're seeing in the surge now. So the big question now is what happens over the next 2 to 3 months. Because as we increase, even in the South, that surge that hit this peak last year in August or July, they ended up hitting another peak back in January, February. So it didn't prevent them from having another surge. The thing is that a lot of people have been either infected or vaccinated now. So we're expecting that it's very reasonable to assume that maybe close to 80% of the people have been either vaccinated or infected at this point. And so as a result, what we're looking at is maybe it could be 20-25% of the people that are still susceptible. And so people can get reinfected and whatnot, but it's typically the very first exposure that's the worst. So if someone has not been previously infected or not vaccinated, they're at the highest risk. And risk goes down each additional time that there's an infection. What we can look briefly, here's the vaccination map. Or actually, this one is good. So here's vaccination. You can see the regional variation here, although some of the states aren't reporting. But Florida, a lot of counties have fairly high vaccination rates, and yet they were still surging. And so that's why I still believe there's this seasonal aspect in terms of the air conditioner summer issue that's going on. Anyway, the last part of your question was how can we protect ourselves? I mean, you know that get the vaccines, wear the masks. The thing is, it's probably best not to travel if you don't have to. There is a high risk of getting infected. People are traveling, thinking that this is a good time to travel, and with Delta, no place is safe right now. I mean, I can bring up this. This is not the one I want. Let me bring this map up. So here's the level of community transmission. I hate this map because I like maps that show you differences and how to gauge stuff, but this is the level of community transmission on a scale of low, moderate, substantial, or high. Everything is high. So there's no low risk place in the United States, except for Puerto Rico, which isn't technically even a state yet, it's just a territory. But you see, don't be fooled that just wearing a mask and getting vaccinated will completely protect us. There still is a risk, even among those who are vaccinated, of getting infected. Pretty substantial risk of getting infected. It's less than if you're not vaccinated. But remember, the key benefit of the vaccines is that it prevents severe illness, hospitalization, and death. and it's still very effective at preventing hospitalization and death, but people are still getting infected left and right, even though they're vaccinated. The key reason for this, again, I've mentioned this before, is that there's different kinds of antibodies. And they're called immunoglobulins. So immunoglobulin G is the one that's very common in the blood, and that protects our organs. And the vaccines help to trigger the immunoglobulin G. In our mucus, there's frequently other kinds of antibodies. The primary one there is immunoglobulin A, or sometimes immunoglobulin M. But immunoglobulin A is seen as the big one there, and the vaccines don't influence immunoglobulin A at all. So therefore, our mucosal membranes don't really protect us even if we're vaccinated, and that's why the infection rate continues to be high. In contrast, people who are previously infected get antibodies to immunoglobulin A and immunoglobulin G. And so therefore, people who are previously infected have this sort of additional protection in their mucosal membrane. But we've talked about this. The vaccine is very, very focused for the S antigen, the spike antigen. And so whereas the natural infection goes to lots and lots of different proteins in the virus. And so typically when you're looking specifically at prevention of severe disease, and hospitalization, we found that people who were previously infected and unvaccinated are around twice as likely to be reinfected and require hospitalization as people who were previously infected and vaccinated. So even among people previously infected, they need to get vaccinated as well. It provides tremendous benefit. All right, Rebecca, I'm just going to briefly look at the globe, and then then we can answer questions because there's so many good ones this year.
So many good. Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Right. So here is our world in data. Let me show a map. This is what we look like. Here's where we are for COVID right now. September 11th was the last data from yesterday. We know it's seasonal. And so when you look at how this looked a few months ago, you can see that the southern hemisphere was darker. And then it's now shifting back to the northern hemisphere because of the seasonality of it. So Brazil, Argentina, South Africa, Southern Africa are getting better now because they're moving out of the cold and flu season. Whereas now you can see across Europe, we're starting to see spikes go up again. In the United States, I can look at some of these charts. So United Kingdom, what we're seeing there is the kids going back to school. We're seeing the spikes going up there. In addition, the United States, we've been seeing this, our summer surge has been driving up. However, the key thing is United Kingdom had much higher vaccination rates. UK had a much higher vaccination rates. And so as a result, in fact, let me just show this real quick. So here's United Kingdom up here. Here's United States. And so the difference, in fact, let me do double people fully vaccinated. So UK is way up here, United States is down here. And so what this has led to is that even though there's lots of cases in UK, when you look at what we really care about is, say, fatalities, the United States is still up here, but UK has dropped quite a lot. So there's still too many, but it's quite a lot lower than United States. And so that's why the vaccinations are so critical. When you compare, here's Europe as a whole, they're still increasing some. It's the seasonal component, so they're going to continue to increase. Brazil has been coming down. They got hit really, really hard. Their vaccination rates were poor, so a lot of people got infected. So now this is essentially a lot of the population has at least some exposure at this point, either through the infection or the vaccine. And so now a lot of the major part of COVID is probably over for them. UK, there's South America was largely driven by Brazil, but not just Brazil. Asia has stayed low generally because of their mask wearing and other mandates. Canada has been good, has been slow. Africa has been really, we can talk about this another week, some of the interesting hypotheses of what's going on in Africa. There's been a lot of great work done on that now. Australia has stayed low because they shut down a lot. And yeah. All right, Rebecca, I just saw your email. All right. Let's see. So that was that. I think that that's good for now. Let's go. Rebecca, I don't know if you're signing back on. If you're not there, then I will just answer, start with the questions. Oops, no, that wasn't it. All right, so the first question that we had was down here. All right, how are we doing with the, how are the vaccines holding up against Delta? There have been a bunch of studies that have been looking at this throughout the course of the surges since the vaccination started coming out. On average, unvaccinated people are 17 times more likely to be hospitalized due to COVID-19. However, with the Delta virus, the Delta is just so, the viral load is the key thing. It's the Delta viral load is so high, and it clings to the receptor much tighter than the previous variants did. So as a result, it's just making it much more likely that everyone gets infected. Even still, the vaccines are holding up. Unvaccinated people are around 10 times more likely to be hospitalized than vaccinated people. So if you restrict the analysis just to say July, August, this time frame, we're looking at around 10 times is what we're looking at. And so this shows the same data cumulatively. So the vaccines are amazing. Everyone needs to get vaccinated. All right. Unless Rebecca comes back.
Glenn, yeah, I'm back.
Okay.
I'm back. Quick question from the audience. Harry, I am going to unmute you. Harry has a question about the flu vaccine. Actually, you need to, I'm going to ask you to unmute. You need to click unmute, Harry or Arlene. There you go.
So the question is, we've got timing to consider. We're beginning to look at the start of the flu season. And so the question is, when do we want to get the flu vaccine in addition to getting the booster shot as it becomes available?
Yeah, so the flu varies seasonally. This is 2020, and you can see that the flu is the green right here, and the flu really started in like October. The last year, we didn't really have a big flu season until like October, November is when the flu started to really hit. Some years it's a little earlier, September, October. Last year it was a little bit delayed. And then you can see when we shut down in March across the United States, that just sort of eliminated the flu at that point because it's so much less contagious than even these other cold viruses that you can see here. So far, there's been a little bit of flu that's popped up here and there in the United States. It's too early to really see it. But in much of the rest of the world, where people have been wearing masks and have been socially distancing and whatnot, we've been really reducing flu globally. And so it's unclear. I think it could go either way in terms of what the flu looks like this year. It could be that the flu is really low because there's just not a lot circulating, and so therefore it doesn't spread very far, particularly if there's some lingering mask wearing and that kind of stuff. It could be that it doesn't spread. Alternatively, it could spread like it's on steroids because people haven't had flu in 2021. And so that means that our antibodies and our immune memory might have diminished a little bit over the last 18 plus months. And so as a result, or roughly almost 2 years, as a result, if we have diminished immune memory, then that means we might get hit harder if we get the flu. And it might also spread more because we'll have higher viral loads because our immune systems are not attacking it. So it's still an open question. So the problem is that because it's the same kind of issue as with COVID, there's only a window of time where your immune system is primed after the vaccine and it diminishes. So the best period is, say, the 3 months after you get the flu vaccine is when you're most protected from the flu. The problem is if you get the flu vaccine in September, say September 1st, then that means you're really well protected September, October through November. But then early December, you lose protection and you start to get diminished protection. So that means when the flu season is really full steam, your immune system is diminished. So that means if you wait a little bit, say you were to wait till October or November last year, if you had, then you would have had better protection November, December, January, maybe into March and April. And so the question is, it's tough. There's no easy answer, because if the flu starts earlier in a given year, then you want to be protected. And so personally, a lot of people are recommending getting the flu vaccine in September or early October. So don't delay, because you do want to be protected. But there is this risk on the other side of the winter when flu might still be circulating, that we might have diminished flu protection. You're on mute. Harry, you're on mute.
Oh, Harry, please unmute. Harry, you're still muted.
So the other question then is, when you are talking about getting the flu vaccine, you also have to put into the equation getting the booster shot for the COVID.
That's right. So the booster shot for COVID should not be, it's a different thought process for getting that. So first of all, we see diminished immune response in people over the age of 65 over time, people who are immunocompromised in some way, either because of a disease process or because they're on an immunocompromising therapy. And so those are the key people who are at higher risk. So they need to think about it. I think right now, the FDA still hasn't given formal guidance on anyone except, I think, people who are immunocompromised. As far as I can tell, I haven't looked recently, but I think that they were looking at people 6 to 8 months. The younger someone is, the less necessary the booster shot is going to be. Even with Delta, the risk still is low. And remember, the one thing that we saw, particularly among younger boys, say under the age of 30, is that, and particularly like the 16, 17, 18-year-old boys, is that there's a problem, they are more likely to have inflammation of the heart as a side effect if they get vaccinated. We know that that's not, for most of them, it's going to be subclinical, that they won't even know they have it. But for a portion, it will require hospitalization. And it's usually self-limiting, but there is this risk. And we don't know yet in that population, if they get a third shot, if it's going to be even more exaggerated than it was for the second shot. And so that's still an open question. And so I would hesitate to get a booster shot until the data comes in with the clinical trials for those age groups. So,
Glenn, could we turn to another question from the audience? Mark, if you could unmute regarding Pfizer vaccine.
Yeah, thanks,
sure.
Rebecca and Glenn. Thanks for all the time you put into this. So we got a vaccine that's fully approved, but there's still so many objections to vaccination for various reasons. Some will just plain never get it. But
right.
What are you seeing any successful means to convince people to get vaccinated?
I think that the mandate that we'll talk about in a second is probably the best way. It's so interesting. There have been some studies on the communication, science communication, and just doing different interventions to see what strategies work best. And it's hard. The problem is that a lot of epidemiologists aren't particularly well trained on the communication part of it, and that's because it's a different skill set, and so it's hard. There's a lot of people who are still very, very resistant, and the fact is that it's really become politicized, and so a lot of people now identify as being vaccine skeptics almost, and as a result, now they're almost entrenched in their position, and so it's not even a question of coming at it with an open mind. A lot of people who are anti-vaccine, it's kind of like their identity now, and that's really, really tough. But that's why I think the mandates are. I'm a mandate supporter. I really think that we need to be more aggressive with these. Yeah, in my personal conversations with people, I have been astonished at how reluctant people have been to even try to understand the data. I mean, there's and that's the other. Here's a couple other things a lot of people don't realize. So one thing is that Paul Krugman, the Nobel laureate in economics, who writes for the New York Times, did a really interesting piece a couple weeks ago on incentives. for being anti-vaxxer. And apparently there's a commercial incentive for some companies to want people to not get vaccinated. And the reason is the supplement companies have made billions of dollars advertising and helping people think that if you take these supplements, it'll prevent you from getting COVID-19 or reduce symptoms and make you healthy and not have to worry about it. And so they've been they've been paying for many millions of dollars in advertising on Fox News, on a lot of these big talking heads who are anti-vaxxers to promote their supplements. And so there's this massive incentive to make to minimize the COVID and to make the vaccine seem like this terrible thing you don't want to get. And so when you have this huge commercial incentive to make people believe that there's there's harm in the vaccine and that they shouldn't get vaccinated, it's so hard to compete with that. And I don't know what can be done about that. I really wish that were called out more. And I really wish there were even regulatory changes in terms of what people can say for this. But that I think is just a crazy component. And so that's one thing. The other thing is there might even be foreign influence. I don't know as much about this. Who even knows if it is? But this is a real problem in the United States, economically, socially, culturally, having these huge, massive number or percentage of the population that refuses to get vaccinated. It's problematic. And so there are a lot of adversaries to us who are not unhappy, perhaps, to see that this is happening in our country. I don't know this latter part, how much that is influencing it, but certainly the supplement industry benefits more by people not getting vaccinated, it seems, in terms of how they're marketing their dollars. All right, Rebecca, let's switch to Biden's mandates.
Okay, thank you for your question, Mark.
All right, so as most of you have probably heard, President Biden signed a couple of executive orders over the last week or so, and here are the main things. So first of all, businesses with more than 100 employees, so 100 or more employees, now have to require vaccines or weekly tests. So people who at those businesses can get weekly tests. They don't have to be vaccinated, but they have to do one or the other. And then there are medical exceptions and religious exemptions. But the other thing is that vaccines are required for federal workers and contractors without a weekly test exception. Everyone has to be vaccinated. And then the third thing is that any healthcare worker at facilities that receive federal funding now have to get vaccinated too. And so the reality is that most healthcare facilities, hospitals and urgent care and whatnot around the country take Medicare patients or Medicaid patients or Veteran Health Administration patients. Because of this, the vast majority of facilities are going to fall under this now, that the healthcare facilities are going to need to do this. So because of this, we expect that many millions of people are now going to get vaccinated. So I can dig into this a little bit. Right now, in the first thing with the businesses 100 and over, that would mean 80 million US workers are covered under that vaccine. But the reality is a lot of them have already been vaccinated. Whoops, I pulled this out and I didn't separate them. So there's a couple key facts that I'll just go through. The federal workers have 75 days to get fully vaccinated. And remember, it's a 2-dose vaccine, so it's roughly 3 to 4 weeks in between. So they're running out of time, but 75 days to get fully vaccinated. Another key thing here is that the new vaccine requirement for federal workers is not just the 2 million government employees. It's also the millions of contractors that do business. And there's a lot more contractors than federal employees. So large ratio. The Department of Defense already made vaccines mandatory. So this doesn't really affect them as much. Let me come back to this one. About 3/4 of US workers have already received at least one vaccine dose. So some of them have not gotten the second dose. So this mandate will apply to them. But then in addition, there's the 1/4 of US workers that haven't even gotten one dose yet. And so those are the key ones that we're hoping this will impact. However, in a survey done by the Washington Post, which who knows how to interpret it, but the survey indicated, it was a recent survey, roughly 7 in 10 of people who are not vaccinated said that they would probably quit if their employer required them to get a shot. And so I don't know how to interpret this. I mean, so assuming that this survives, that the executive orders survive Supreme Court scrutiny, if 7 in 10 truly were to quit their jobs out of 25% of the American workers, that could be crazy. I mean, I don't know what that would look like. Or a lot of them might just change their mind and realize it's not worth it. I'm assuming that most of them will just end up getting vaccinated because there's really nothing to worry about with the vaccines. And so the risks are really, really low. And so that's good. I think one of the things I looked at with the quote that I like to say is that people in general are 4 times more likely to die from being struck by lightning than they are to be hospitalized because of a bad side effect from the vaccine. So we're talking about vaccines that are extremely safe when you look at it that way. All right. So there's religious exemptions, and that's it. Those were the key things I wanted to talk about for the mandate. Are there any questions about the mandate, or is that it? I'm hoping that, and it's interesting, the one other thing I'll say is that the President Biden structured this because he wanted even more widespread vaccination policies across lots of companies and across lots of organizations. He has no authority to mandate that for a larger number of organizations. However, by doing this, he's hoping that it will sort of spur on a lot of other organizations to then sort of follow the lead of these executive orders and then also implement vaccine mandates. We're also hoping, one suspicion I have is that what I'm hoping, and I don't have evidence for this, but what I'm hoping is that the more people an unvaccinated person gets vaccinated, the more likely that unvaccinated person might be to themselves get vaccinated, just because they might see a lot more people around them totally fine after they're vaccinated. I don't know if that's the case, but it could be. But ultimately, I think this, given the lack of vaccination in this country, I really think the executive order was necessary and overdue, frankly.
Excellent. Thanks for that deep dive, Glenn. A common statement that many unvaccinated are making is, well, this technology is just so new, and how can we trust it? It's just new technology, this mRNA vaccine technology. And you've told us a bit about this over our time together. And can you just briefly remind us about the history of the mRNA technology? And then we all can be armed with this information when we hear people say it's just too new to be trusted.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, there's a bunch more questions. After this, I'll try to do more rapid, just a minute or two answer for each of them. So basically, the key insight here with mRNA was first, the messenger RNA was first discovered in 1961. We've been looking at it for many decades now in terms of identifying it. Injection of mRNA clinically was, you can see up through 1992, was continuing. Injection of the antigen into mouse muscle as a cancer vaccine was first investigated in 1995, so decades ago. The first clinical trial of mRNA was in 2001. And so this has been going on for decades. You can see that when you look at the, so I'm just doing very high level here. When you look at additional clinical trials of mRNA therapeutics, 2009 there were more. The first human test of personalized mRNA vaccines for cancer, 2017. So it's been used heavily for other therapeutic areas. It's now at the vaccine. Don't be scared off by mRNA. It's not something that's new in terms of the technology. For the specific use case that we have here, the thing that's really making it new is the lipid nanoparticles. We're encapsulating it in a slightly different way so that more of it is taken into the cell so it's not degraded too fast. That's been studied also since 1965. We've been studying a lot of encapsulation methods since then. It was first approved by the FDA in 2012. And since then, it's been used for a bunch of different therapies and whatnot. So, but ultimately, we shouldn't get scared of the technology. It's really just, I see it as uninteresting in some ways. It's a great step forward for a bunch of reasons. It makes us it enables us to more rapidly get the vaccines out. It's really a useful approach, but don't think of the vaccines as sort of like science juice. Some people think of the vaccines as science juice and it scares them and they don't want to take it because they don't know what's in the science juice, when really this is nothing to be scared of. The key thing, this RNA, is literally only in the body for a very short period, and it's the antibodies that stay on for a long time. So it's not like these things are sticking around and there might be some long-term consequences that we don't know about. In every vaccine previously studied, any major consequence has been found within 2 months. So any major adverse event has been found within 2 months. We don't see this in the 2 months. That's why the clinical trials were looking at 2 months for the emergency use authorization. We haven't seen any massive adverse event other than what we've talked about. For the mRNA virus vaccines, it was the heart inflammation was the big one, and that is also really, really rare. And then for the J&J vaccines and the adenovirus vaccines, it seems like there's a very rare kind of clotting that it might influence the clotting, but that's also extremely, extremely rare. And for people that it does occur in, we now know treatments to prevent more severe illness in case they get it. So don't be worried. This is the history. Anyway, so we can go on.
Excellent. Oh, sorry. Did you want to say more about mRNA? Okay.
No, that's okay.
All right. So we know it's been around for quite some time. Okay. Shall we talk about, since you're on do-it-yourself air filters?
Let's just jump here real quickly, just for people who might be interested. So NPR did this really interesting piece. So this was up in the Boston area. Some scientists realized you don't really need a lot of money at your schools to have filters put together, because you can do it yourself just with a very inexpensive box fan that you get, and then just buying the filters themselves without a whole unit. And so the directions are here. I can just go through it like very, very rapidly, but search NPR for do-it-yourself filters. But basically all you do is you buy 4 filters directly, which are very inexpensive, directly from Home Depot or Amazon or wherever. Then you just tape it to the fan, you put some cardboard on to give it stability, and then you're all set. And these fans work. It's a pure filter because the filter is doing all the work here. And so it's a really good way to get a really good filter cheaply in schools that might not be able to afford, or companies or organizations that can't really afford to revamp a whole room. Now people can do this themselves if they're so motivated. It takes under an hour to do by virtually anyone. It's literally just a matter of taping the things together. The directions are all here. Search NPR if you want more information about that.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing. I will look that up. Let's switch gears just a touch and go back to antibodies. I know Harry spoke about the booster shot, and he asked a great question about timing of the flu shot. And what can you tell us about antibody tests? And for those who are curious when they should be getting their booster shot, would this be something that you would recommend to know your level of immunity? Does that impact, or should that impact a decision to get a booster?
So that is a good question. The short answer is no. And let me see if I pull this out. No, the short. So I pulled out a slide, but I don't have it quickly. But so just to quickly answer the question, the short answer is no. The problem with antibody tests is that they're really hard to interpret. Some people, because remember the key thing. Oh, here, I'll go to this slide. Oh, here it is. Yeah, the key thing is that once you are first exposed, either by infection or vaccination, you have an initial antibody response, but then the antibodies diminish over time to almost an undetectable level in most people, but you still retain the immune memory. And when you're infected a second time, or if you've been vaccinated, you're infected the first time, then you much more rapidly develop new antibodies. And this is really what protects you from hospitalization and death. So you can still get reinfected, but really when all we really care about are hospitalization and death. So even if the antibody level is low, it's not necessarily a good indicator that the risk of hospitalization or death has changed. And we know that from that's just immunology 101. But in addition, this is looking at vaccine breakthrough, but it's the kind of issue in terms of there's this surge of antibodies after there's an infection. And the first couple of days, the viral load is going to be roughly the same, regardless of whether someone's vaccinated or previously infected, or unvaccinated or not previously infected. But then very quickly, the green line, which represents vaccine here, and it likely represents the previously infected as well to some degree, or not necessarily, but we expect it to be very different than red, where people with an immune memory will very quickly be able to develop antibodies and clear their system. So that's the short answer. Is that
So then I guess, then just a follow up to that. So then folks really should just wait for the recommendation from the CDC, and then as far as timing goes, and then look at their own personal schedules as to when they receive the initial shots.
Oh, absolutely. Well put, Rebecca. I think that the key thing here is because if you do the antibody test, it comes back like undetectable. It doesn't mean what you think it means. It means that you're in your head, and the reason for that is that because every human being is exposed to so many different viruses and bacteria every year, if we continued having high levels of antibodies to everything we're exposed to, our blood would just get thick of antibodies, and it wouldn't be able to do anything else in terms of like having red blood cells and like other things in our body. It would just become thick with all these antibodies. So our body needs to reduce the number of antibodies until we're reinfected. And that's why it goes down to undetectable levels. We retain this immune memory in our bone marrow, and then it comes back up if we're infected again. And so that's the way it works. All right, there's some other really good things. Let's ask a few more questions. We can go a couple minutes.
Yeah, I'm going to just jump to another question from the audience. Sandy, if you could please unmute to ask your question about long haul.
Thank you both. Glenn, besides avoiding death and hospitalization, I'm concerned about people who are having brain fog or brain problems. I mean, serious problems, or heart ramifications, or organ difficulties. Or long haulers. Aren't there other things that we should be worried about that we might not know about besides, even though we've been vaccinated?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there's a couple of things to talk about. Yeah, so people who are long haulers, there's some things going on in their body. We don't know exactly what's going on. There's a lot of different theories right now. One is that it is an immune system issue that's gone haywire. Another is that it's just cytokines, for instance, that are just continuing to be elevated. Another issue is that maybe there was cellular damage that just hasn't healed itself. So maybe some of the nerves were originally damaged and they just never healed themselves. Maybe there is a lingering infection. And so even though we think it's an infection that goes away, maybe it's hiding out in some cells that we just don't know about yet. Most of us don't believe that hypothesis, by the way, but it's still an open hypothesis that some people are investigating. The last one, I think this one is a really intriguing idea. And this one here, I'll get into it and then I'll come back to your question in a second. This hypothesis is that so previously the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which was this thing, would then bind to the ACE2 receptor. When we developed antibodies, there were two ways. There were people who were naturally infected and people who were vaccinated. People who were naturally infected developed all sorts of crazy antibodies. It was not very focused, but some of them tended to work better than others. And so as a result, people who are naturally infected, you get antibodies on the surface all over the virus. The problem was, as sometimes happens in the human body, we start making antibodies to the antibody. So if an antibody looks like this, then you can make antibodies to the antibody, and that damages the antibody. And so so what ends up happening is there's something. So the ACE2 enzyme, or not, I'm sorry, so it's an auto antibody is what I mean to say. So you have the ACE2 enzyme that looks very similar to this, because remember, the ACE2 receptor was evolved a certain way so that it would be very tightly binding the ACE2 receptor, the ACE2 enzyme. And so that means that the spike protein looks very much like the ACE2 enzyme. So for people who are naturally infected, they are making a lot of antibodies that can't really tell the difference between the SARS-2 spike protein versus the naturally occurring in our bodies ACE2 enzyme. And the problem is, and right now, and so the study that I'm about to show you demonstrates massive autoimmune systems where it seems like this is extremely, extremely common, where people who are naturally infected are designing antibodies that are self-attacking. They're attacking the ACE2 enzyme. And so what does the ACE2 enzyme do? So it basically converts this thing called angiotensin 2 to angiotensin 1. The problem with angiotensin 2 is that if angiotensin 2 is responsible for vasoconstriction, fibrosis, it's pro-inflammatory, oxidative stress. Basically, it controls blood pressure and organ damage because it's sort of inflammatory. The ACE2 enzyme converts it into this other thing, into angiotensin 1, and that's vasodilating. It helps to expand the cardiovasculature. It's protective of the vascular system. It's anti-inflammatory. And so the problem is when these antibodies that have gone haywire in people who are naturally infected, it attacks the ACE2 enzyme, and so it prevents the angiotensin 2 into being converted into angiotensin 1. So all of these bad things are now happening in a lot of people who are naturally infected. And so this seems like a really compelling hypothesis because now this new study came out looking at this in real world data, or clinically rather, and we were able to see that there's a huge change. The interesting thing is that the vaccines, the way they were designed, are specifically attacking a part of the surface antigen, it's the S protein, that doesn't look very much like the ACE2 enzyme. So as a result, people who get vaccinated and create antibodies are not getting long COVID symptoms. And so this is a massive another reason why people should get vaccinated. And we've also noticed that people who have long COVID because they were naturally infected and get the vaccine are a lot of them lose their symptoms. And that might be because it shifts the antibody focus to more of the receptor binding domain sites that are less, look less like the ACE2 enzyme. So that's good news. And what this also means is that people who were vaccinated and who get the booster, even if they get vaccinated, or rather, even if they get infected, the vaccine should still provide very strong protection against long COVID and these other things that are worrisome. Because again, we believe, and this is good evidence, the study is good evidence, that it's the ACE2 enzyme that's really at play here. And it's almost like an autoimmune disease when we're talking about long COVID at this point. All right.
Excellent. Wow. I was getting a little scared by that very deep dive into the scientific components, but you made it seem so simple, Glenn. Somehow you took something very complex and you made it quite accessible like you always do. Okay, we are at the top of the hour. So many good questions. Thank you to everybody. Please keep sending them in. I think it's safe to say when we meet again, we'll have more data on what's happening in schools. So some of those questions regarding schools, I think Glenn will better be able to answer those when we meet again. And when are we meeting again, Glenn?
Yeah, so we're meeting again in 2 weeks. So back to normal. We might want to consider meeting weekly if there's an interest. But I think for now, the 2 week, once every 2 weeks, I think is still sufficient.
Okay.
We're not getting to every question. Some of them are repeats. Like, do we need to worry about variants? The answer is no. There's no. Delta is so contagious; it's wiping out all the other variants. That it's out competing everything else, and so the other variants are all going extinct. Mu is another one. It seems like every couple of weeks there's a new one in the news. Mu is another one where it was higher in June, then dropped in July, and then August. If there's a variant of concern that we need to be concerned about, the numbers would be getting higher. But every single variant is getting less. So anyway, my point is there are a lot of questions we're just not getting to. Let's just plan to meet in 2 weeks for the next time. If we find that we're just accumulating too many questions and we can't get to them all, then maybe we can start meeting on a weekly basis again. But we'll see. The big question is look like in 2 weeks from now, we're going to have so much more data. The hospitalization question, we are starting to run out of ICU beds around the country. Oh, this one thing that we've already heard. An Alabama man just died. He tried going to 43 hospitals, and 43 turned him away before he could finally find a hospital it was 200 miles from his home. This was just over the last couple of days. So we are in a very, very serious phase of the disease here. And the risk of hospitals filling up and intensive care units filling up is extremely high, both in general, but also in particular for pediatric patients. So that in 2 weeks, we'll have a lot more data. But this is, I mean, when you see something like this is not what we think of in the United States. I mean, this is something we think of in undeveloped countries. And already we're seeing this. This is already September. So 2 weeks, we'll have a lot more to talk about.
How tragic. Okay, so I think we're going to pause it there. Everybody continue to stay safe. Take good care of yourselves. And Glenn, thank you from the bottom of all of our hearts for everything that you're doing. I can't say it enough, how you take something so complex and you really make it all so accessible. We're all so grateful to you. Thank you for your time. And we'll see you all in 2 weeks. Take care.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, everyone. Keep sending your questions in. Bye-bye.